Good morning. It seems we finish up one story about our semiconductor sanctions and how they're hurting American companies and companies in friendly countries, and then comes another. Everything happens fast in tech and breakthroughs happen quickly. What's more, companies know that China is where the biggest industrial users are for high-speed chips because they make most of the products that require electronics of all kinds. So our companies need to walk a fine line between enjoying access to the Chinese market and thereby staying in business and making government bureaucrats in Washington happy and staying out of court. Where this is headed ultimately is that more and more companies will simply decide that it's too much of a hassle. There's too much risk to be an American company, and they'll either move away entirely or they'll carve up their company into separate divisions that serve separate markets. And if you're a startup, obviously you need to strongly consider just incorporating elsewhere. Said another way, our government in Washington is compelling companies to reorganize in order to stay in business, and we're sending a message to the rest of the world that the United States is uninvestable. Nvidia is the company designing the most advanced AI chips. The semiconductors used in the most demanding applications for artificial intelligence. Nvidia designs them, but they do not produce them. And this is an important distinction. Nvidia outsources the production of their chips to Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation. This is true of the semiconductor industry in general, which complicates matters for the Biden administration, who just want to ban the exports of these products to China or to anyone else. The chips are never in the United States until the foundry in Taiwan ships them over. They're being built at Taiwan Semiconductor and then put into a box with an American company's name on the side. So Nvidia and others have to comply with export restrictions, but they face very strong competition from competitors here in China. Huawei and SMIC are the most famous and largest companies that are giving our companies a lot of problems now. But there are hundreds of others. Nobody knows that better than Nvidia, who also has a lot of people here in China. Nvidia is developing a chip called the B20, specifically for the Chinese market. It's somewhat slower than the Blackwell B200 GPU, which they released earlier, and they hoped to ship the modified chip to China starting Q4 of this year. But now they're facing new restrictions in Washington that put those plans in jeopardy. Here is the money quote from the U.S. Commerce Secretary. She warned chip companies last year to stop trying to design around her export rules. She would control the new chips the very next day. So here is Nvidia's problem, which is that they have to sell here in order to survive at all. They're under increased pressure from Chinese domestic suppliers like Huawei, and Nvidia has to develop a lineup of chips that they can sell here in order to be in this market. But here is their serious problem. First, they need to follow US regulations on AI chip exports, which, let's remember again, are not made in the United States at all. And second, they need to make sure that Chinese buyers don't think the chips are inferior to what they can get elsewhere in the Chinese market. And that's getting harder and harder to do. As to this chip, the primary advantage of the B20 will be that they have improved interconnection features which allow for multiple cards to be stacked. But now the Commerce Department is likely to stop those sales as well. Here is the recent history of Nvidia's and the Biden administration's trillion-dollar whack-a-mole game. Nvidia needs China. It's their third largest market, and it's being targeted by stricter and stricter US sanctions. Nvidia was told it could not sell the A100 and H100 GPUs in August 2022. So they modified those to get around the restrictions, but then those got banned too. And there's Gina Raimondo's quote again about controlling the chips the very next day after a company designs a new one. And let's remember what everyone else also knows. In January of next year, Gina Raimondo is not going to be in that job. She works for Joe Biden, and he's leaving no later than next January. This may be why Nvidia was careful here to announce that the B20 will start in Q2 of next year. Nvidia will be partnered with Inspur, a Chinese distributorship company. These are certain objective realities that cannot be ignored by anyone not living in Washington, D.C. The fastest semiconductors are not made in the United States. For that, companies go to Taiwan or South Korea or Japan. Chinese companies who need the chips are buying from mainland China companies here. But no companies go to the United States to have semiconductor chips made. That's the first reality. The next is that the Chinese market's the biggest in the world, by far, for semiconductors. And if a company like Nvidia or Intel or AMD or anyone else hopes to be in that industry 10 years from now, they need to be in China. Finally is the realization, industry-wide and worldwide, that all of our sanctions are failing. The sanctions against Russia have been a failure. The sanctions against China have been a failure. These semiconductor sanctions have only motivated China to build their own industry and motivated our own companies to thread the needle between having their companies fined or indicted by our own governments or put out of business by companies that do not operate under the thumb of US regulators. And that's where things are going to go in this industry and in many others. There are lots of other places to set up a new company, lots of other places to find high-quality STEM graduates, low taxes, low regulations. And you never have to worry about someone you've never met saying that she's going to control your product the very next day. This is Chujing, Hunan Province. Be good.